For thousands of years, the civilization of ancient Egypt has mystified and fascinated people around the world. With its towering pyramids, colossal statues, and complex hieroglyphics, this ancient kingdom is a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of its people. But what lies beneath the surface of this magnificent culture? Let's travel back in time to explore the secrets of ancient Egypt and reveal the true story of this enigmatic civilization. The story of ancient Egypt begins more than 5,000 years ago, in the lush and fertile lands surrounding the Nile River. The Nile was the lifeblood of civilization, providing a source of water, food, and transportation. The first settlers arrived in the Nile Valley around 5000 BC, and they were hunter-gatherers who relied on the river's resources for survival. However, as they started to observe the seasonal patterns of the Nile's flooding, they began to experiment with agriculture, eventually leading to the development of a complex irrigation system that would transform the region into a prosperous agricultural society. As agriculture became more established, small communities began to form along the riverbanks. These communities were largely self-sufficient, and each one had its own unique customs and traditions. Over time, some of these communities grew more powerful than others, and as they expanded, they started to form city-states. One of the earliest of these city-states was Memphis, which was founded around 3100 BC. Memphis became the capital of a unified Egypt, and it was here that the first pharaohs of Egypt came to power. The first person to become a pharaoh is a matter of historical debate, as the ancient Egyptian civilization developed over thousands of years, and its early history is not well documented. However, according to Egyptian mythology, the first pharaoh was Menes, a god that existed around 3100 BCE. It is claimed he commanded Upper Egypt and conquered the lower half, marrying a princess from that region and uniting the two kingdoms. It is likely that Menes and other early pharaohs gained their power through military conquest and political skill. Their power, however, was preserved using religious authority, a tool widely used among early settlements. Over time, the pharaohs started aligning themselves with earthly representatives of the gods and became infinitely powerful. It is now 2600 BC, generations have passed, and the pharaohs are now widely regarded as living gods. Gods that have implemented taxes, compulsory tribute, and perhaps the most clever of them all, a system of corvée labor, a system that requires all able-bodied citizens to contribute a certain number of days each year to public work projects. This gave them total authority over the workforce, land, and its resources, including agriculture, mining, and trade. The wealth generated through these industries was used to fund public work projects such as the construction of divine tombs, colossal tombs in the form of pyramids. It was believed that upon death, a pharaoh's soul would ascend to the heavens to be judged by the gods. The body, however, needed to be preserved and protected so that the soul could return to it and continue its journey. Thus, the construction of the pyramids began. These towering structures were designed to house the pharaoh's body, along with all the treasures and possessions they would need in the afterlife. They were built to be massive, with the largest of them standing over 140 meters tall. The pyramids, however, were not just tombs, but were also a symbol of the pharaoh's power and greatness. They served as a physical manifestation of the pharaoh's divine authority and were meant to awe and inspire all who beheld them. The construction of these extraordinary structures required an enormous amount of resources, labor, and time. It is estimated that it took a massive 100,000 workers more than 20 years to build the Great Pyramids of Giza. The divine pharaohs prepared well for the heavens, but their time on earth was much the same. Their life was glamorous and extravagant, surrounded by the finest luxuries and comforts that money could buy. They lived in grand palaces, adorned with gold and precious stones, and were waited on hand and foot by an army of servants. The common people would bow down before them, offering gifts and sacrifices in the hopes of earning their favor. 1,300 years after the pyramids of Giza would come the reign of Tutankhamun, a boy shrouded in mystery who became pharaoh at a young age, possibly as young as 9. His tomb is undoubtedly one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in history, containing a wealth of treasures and artifacts that had been untouched for thousands of years. Tutankhamun ruled for only a decade before his sudden mysterious death. Very little is known about his death, but it is known 20 years after his passing came a man that would go down in history regarded as the most powerful and most celebrated pharaoh ever to grace this life. Born in 1303 BC, Ramesses was the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. His father, Seti I, was a great pharaoh himself, and it was under his tutelage that Ramesses learned the skills needed to be a successful leader. When Ramesses came to the throne, he was only 25 years old, but he quickly proved himself to be a capable and ambitious ruler. Most importantly, he was a successful military leader, leading campaigns against other neighboring empires. A battle that changed the face of history was the Battle of Kadesh, fought against the Hittite Empire in 1274 BCE. The Hittite Empire was a powerful force in the ancient world, rivaled only by the Egyptians in terms of military might and cultural influence. Their territory spanned across modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. However, their dominance was threatened by the powerful Egyptian pharaoh, Ramesses II, who sought to capture the Hittite city of Kadesh. In 1274 BCE, the Hittite army ambushed the Egyptians who had set camp outside the city. Despite being ferociously ambushed and outnumbered, Ramesses courageously led his troops into battle, fighting off waves of Hittite soldiers with a skill and determination that defied all odds of nature. Despite Ramesses' bravery, defeat seemed inescapable. His troops were exhausted and outnumbered, and the Hittite forces continued to press forward, threatening to crush them completely. As all hope was lost, Ramesses struck up miraculous tactics that would ultimately lead to a Hittite retreat. The Egyptians never captured Kadesh, but inherently survived a devastating Hittite chariot ambush. The young king had courageously rallied his scattered troops to fight on the battlefield and escape death. Despite his many accomplishments, Ramesses was not without his flaws. He was known to be an egotistical and sometimes too cruel of a ruler. There are stories of him ordering the execution of his own sons when they fell out of favor with him. His reign was also marked by economic struggles and unrest, which may have been a contributing factor to the decline of the kingdom after him. For centuries, the pharaohs and their people had built a powerful and prosperous civilization along the Nile River. With their pyramids, temples, and mighty armies, the Egyptians had long been the dominant force in the region, admired and feared by neighbors. This has all changed in 5th century BCE, when the mighty Persian Empire, led by the ambitious and skilled King Cambyses II, set its sights on Egypt. The Persians had already conquered much of the Near East and Central Asia, and now they sought to add the rich and fertile land of Egypt to their growing empire. At first, the pharaohs and their armies put up a fierce resistance. They fought bravely and tenaciously against the Persians, determined to defend their homeland and their way of life. But despite their best efforts, they were eventually overwhelmed by the superior military might of the Persians. The fall of Egypt to the Persians was a devastating blow to the pharaohs and their people. The Persians sacked cities, destroyed temples, and plundered the treasures of the Egyptians. Many Egyptians were killed or enslaved, and those who survived were forced to submit to Persian rule. For the pharaohs, who had long seen themselves as the divine rulers of Egypt, the loss of their kingdom was a profound humiliation. They were forced to flee their palaces and tombs, their power and prestige reduced to nothing. Their gods and goddesses were replaced by Persian deities, their language and culture suppressed. But despite the crushing defeat, the legacy of the pharaohs lived on. And although they may have lost their kingdom to the Persians, the pharaohs remained a symbol of Egyptian identity and pride, a reminder of the glories of the past and the resilience of the human spirit. In the year 332 BC, Alexander the Great, one of the greatest military strategists and conquerors of all time, set out on his campaign to conquer Egypt from the Persians. The journey itself was grueling, with Alexander and his army battling harsh desert conditions and facing numerous challenges along the way. But Alexander's unwavering determination and military prowess allowed him to overcome these challenges and achieve his goal of conquering Egypt. As Alexander moved deeper into the heart of Egypt, he was welcomed by the people, who saw him as a liberator and a savior from the oppressive rule of the Persians. Alexander, in turn, respected the customs and traditions of the Egyptian people. During his time in Egypt, he established strong alliances with local leaders, which allowed him to maintain control over the region for the next 9 years until his death. Upon his death, his vast empire was divided among his generals, with Egypt falling under the rule of one of his most trusted commanders, Ptolemy I. Ptolemy then established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled over Egypt for the next 3 centuries. During this time, Egypt remained under Greek rule, with the Ptolemaic dynasty adopting many of the customs and traditions of the ancient Egyptians to consolidate their power. The Ptolemaic dynasty continued until their final ruler and pharaoh, Cleopatra IV. The Ptolemies were Greeks who had adopted Egyptian culture and religion, and Cleopatra was raised as an Egyptian, speaking the language and practicing the rituals of the pharaohs. When Cleopatra was 18 years old, her father died, and she was appointed joint ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. However, their relationship was fraught with tension and power struggles, and in 48 BC, Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt after Ptolemy's advisors staged a coup against her. Cleopatra found refuge in Rome, where she met Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world. Legend has it that she smuggled herself into his palace wrapped in a rug, seeking an audience with him. Caesar was immediately smitten with the beautiful and charismatic queen, and she soon became his lover and ally. Together, Cleopatra and Caesar waged war against her brother Ptolemy, and in 47 BC, they emerged victorious. Cleopatra was reinstated as the sole ruler of Egypt, and she and Caesar had a son together, Caesarion. However, their happiness was short-lived. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated, and Cleopatra was left vulnerable to her enemies. She formed an alliance with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's generals, and they became lovers and political partners. Together, Cleopatra and Mark Antony ruled Egypt and the eastern territories of the Roman Empire. However, their relationship was also met with hostility and opposition, both from the Roman Senate and from Mark Antony's rival, Octavian. In 31 BC, Cleopatra and Mark Antony faced Octavian's forces in the Battle of Actium. Despite their superior numbers and naval prowess, they were defeated, and they fled back to Egypt. Octavian pursued them, and in 30 BC he besieged Alexandria. In a tragic end to her story, Cleopatra chose to take her own life rather than be captured by Octavian. According to legend, she allowed herself to be bitten by a poisonous asp, a symbol of divine royalty in ancient Egypt. As all good things must come to an end, Cleopatra's death marked the end of a 3,000-year-old pharaoh rule. But it was only the beginning of another, one that was possibly even more illustrious.